Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Pollock, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago reporting, and welcome to another edition of the Goldwater Report. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for joining us. I want to again state for the record that anytime the characters involved in this sordid tale of deceit, propagated by the fraud Neil Keenan, he or any of his cohorts are most welcome to call 312-544-0134. Again, that phone number is 312-544-0134. Or they can email our lead writer, Brian Sittler, at the following email address, bsittler@thecritical-post.com. That's bsittler, B-S-I-D-L-E-R, at thecritical-post.com. So they can give us advance notice for when they'd like to provide their evidence of the facts leading to all their wild claims. Also so that we can have our forensic investigators on the line at the same time of their phone-in. And I can assure you and them we'll be asking lots of tough questions we don't think they've got the guts to answer. Or for that matter, the guts to call in the first place. No. In fact, the only thing they can do, ladies and gentlemen, is shoot spitballs from the basement they hang out in. They don't have the guts. They're toothless tigers. We're not impressed. Please do send the FBI to our door. And please do, with all due dispatch, have the Illinois State's Attorney's Office get in contact with us as soon as possible. We'd love to answer their questions. We'd like to urge all of you who view this to again watch our interview of the award-winning documentary filmmaker Mr. Bill Still, so that you could become better acquainted with the correct terminologies, so that folks understand the difference between debt-based money issued by all the private banking cartels of the world, including China and Russia, fractional banking and lending practices, gold as money, and the term called seigniorage, so that you can understand what seigniorage really means and who should be owning it. Once you understand the differences correctly, you'll know that no amount of gold from anywhere is going to help anyone do anything. Ask yourself this question. Can you go to a coin store or bullion store right now and use the money you have in your bank account to buy gold or silver or any other precious commodity, diamonds, rubies? Even though it's debt-based money, is it not legal tender? Of course you can. So what's the point? The royal bloodlines of China want you to be convinced they're the most honest bankers on the planet? Is that so? Try saying something bad about the government in China or Russia and see where that gets you. America is still the cleanest dirty shirt in a drawer, as Mr. Bill Still would say. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind the audience we dropped our coverage of this 2 years ago because nothing of the sort described by these men is ever going to occur. And we knew it then as we do now. We have again picked up on it because we were asked to. These men changed their stories so often. Keeping track of the amount of deception is a task in and of itself. We have assembled reams of material about it. And this weekend, as the editor, I will be reviewing all of the material and assembling it in an order of properly formatted fact in a coherent manner. The next and final broadcast submission will also include the attendance of the point man for the White Hats report, not to be confused with the website known as Confessions of a Former White Hat WordPress blog. And also in attendance will be the man we call Charlie. We call him Charlie for the time being. This last broadcast is going to take up the better part of 3 hours, we estimate. A great deal of pertinent material has been gathered. This particular broadcast submission is a preface to our upcoming release of Part 2 in the series regarding the investigation into the sordid details of this internet feedback loop, monetary and informational fraud perpetrated since the beginning of the early months of 2012. Recently, on a trip to California, I went to meet a man we call Charlie, who some may already know from previous broadcast submissions, is a forensic investigation expert regarding legacy high-value bank instrument assets. And while I was there, we spent 6 days together going over all of his files, which are dossiers of counterfeit legacy high-value bank instruments, dossiers of genuine certificates which have been issued in the past, as well as dossiers on hundreds of individuals he has been in contact with and or tracked during a career that spans over 40 years to date. While we were there, Charlie and I also spent time online with Jean Haynes, the woman who has been bilked of hundreds of thousands of dollars of her personal retirement funds, which she tendered to prop up the fraud Neil Keenan. There'll be much more on that in Part 2. However, one of the facts that jumped out at me while spending 6 days in conversation with Charlie were instances he related to me whereby he was contacted by a man, one Mr. Gene Valentine, during the year of 2012, once earlier in the year, and another time in December of that year, again 2012 being that year. Gene Valentine asserted to Charlie all kinds of references to himself as to what he was doing, what he was going to do for Charlie, and an agenda which Gene Valentine was working at the time behind the scenes with a number of individuals he attested he had been working with to perform. Gene Valentine attested he had lots of money and is the owner of a bed and breakfast located in the hills of Brooke County of West Virginia called Mount St. George, originally named Vancroft by the founding builders of the estate, which was originally the home and working farm of James B. Vandergrift, a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania steel heir. He promised Charlie a salaried position. He promised him that the salaried position was going to be as a director of a home for homeless veterans that he was going to build. He gave him a computer and a cell phone on his first visit. The problem for Gene Valentine was that unbeknownst to him at the time, Charlie has a problem. It's called integrity. And at that time, because Charlie knows the difference between a scam and something legit, Charlie had then and there made up his mind without having to outright refuse Valentine or be rude. He was going to make himself undesirable so that Valentine would just go away. But it was on the second visit, which is the reason I am calling the audience's attention to this, that struck me as a bit off the rails, so to speak. First, I must make mention of the fact that Gene Valentine attested to Charlie he was going to be part of a team of individuals working in concert with each other. Second fact I'd like to impart, according to Charlie, is that after an investigation into Gene Valentine's personal history, he turned up the fact that some of the money that supports the Lyndon LaRouche PAC comes from Valentine's wallet. In our first video, we explained what a semantical operation entails, how it works, and the standard operational procedures the CIA and other intelligence organizations uses to perform all sorts of operations, to include taking down high visibility figures like the one we described concerning Tom Perkins and his yacht called the Maltese Falcon, valued at the time of over $225 million. The point is that the CIA uses various ruses, whereas to the public it looks like one thing, by using personnel in the field, or cutouts, to put forward a specific theme or event, all the while the intention is quite the opposite. In other words, they say one thing but do quite yet another for an intended effect. During the years of 2011, 2012, 2013, hundreds upon hundreds of high-ranking military officials were fired or forced into retirement by the current government corporation administration. Dozens of top brass in the Pentagon were removed. All in all, in 2013 alone, 157 Air Force majors were forced into retirement with no benefits. Some would attest that this fact could be attributed to the much vaunted budget sequestration, propagandized by the major media corporate conglomerates of those years as the reason. Here's the interesting point. During the December meeting, in the midst of conversation with Valentine, Charlie attested that Gene Valentine got a wild look in his eye. Well, I'll let Charlie tell the story. Quote, Valentine told me that I would be salaried to be the director of his $5 million homeless veterans center building in West Virginia, and that I would be one of 10 people linked to his communications network, of which I was part of for one day. Whereupon I personally discovered through Valentine that indeed Drake was one of 10 Valentine was using. However, later when Valentine asked me to meet with him in his motel room, he began speaking calmly, and over my cross-examining about what he wanted out of me, he started talking about the state of the nation, gradually working his own intensity up to a degree whereupon he became extremely vociferous about his belief system, reminding me, as Charlie puts it, Adolf Hitler giving one of his crushing enemy speeches, to such a degree that Valentine's face became reddened. He began to sweat profusely and then began to raise his voice even more, saying, "Many high-level military leaders are going to be eliminated, and you are going to be a part of this because you are now one of 10 who will be involved with this." Whereupon I simply replied, baiting him with questions to make him calm down from his unprovoked rant, and the following day devised my pretext for making myself appear undesirable to Valentine, so he would no longer believe in his own mind that I would make a good part of Valentine's Team 10. Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, on the phone that Charlie received from Valentine, which had on it 10 phone numbers pre-stored for use, which were the key members of the team that Charlie was to be part of, among the names which were pre-stored on that phone, there was one that stuck out in his mind, and that, of course, is the name of the person, the laughable character, Drake Bailey. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't it curious that the time frame in question coincides with stories being perpetrated by Bailey, Fulford, Keenan, Wilcock, and others of mass arrests? We assert, though, these idiots could have in fact been duped into believing one thing, and actually believed it, and that would be the most positive of viewpoints concerning the situation, that in fact what occurred unfolded in two parts and was part of a broader operation amongst several layers of other semantical operations being put into play simultaneously. 1. Instead of mass arrests, what did occur was the firing of scores of top brass previously mentioned. Hence, the semantical operation theme plays well within this scenario. 2, that when the web was all buzzing with internet traffic surrounding the fantastic story of mass arrests and a quote-unquote global monetary reset, what actually occurred was the ability to track where the concentrations of patriot nutjobs, much like the floundering character of Drake Bailey, were located in the country and the size of those populations. Ladies and gentlemen, the CIA has the ability to perform this operation, and I personally know for a fact, due to my exposure to many things within the Department of Energy, as an executive vice president of an artificial intelligence software firm. The name of the exact system which can do it, I cannot divulge because I am still under a very binding non-disclosure agreement to not reveal what the system is. I can tell you it exists. One further note regarding the lead-up to this massive information fraud. On August 28th of 2010, Charlie received an email from Neil Keenan asking Charlie to be a ghostwriter on a book in the following manner. Quote, "Others have already requested book rights to do this. Do you think you can do a good job at this? If so, when it is over with, I will work with you on the story. I need a ghostwriter, if this can be you. unquote. Again, I want you to make note of that date, ladies and gentlemen, the 28th of August, 2010. And we have the record for that. The point is, folks, what Keenan was doing back in 2010 was forging a plan to publicize himself in such a manner as to position the fraud as a legitimate enterprise, sensationalized by a fictional account of events laced with a few facts sprinkled in for good measure. Isn't it interesting, ladies and gentlemen, that they did in fact find their ghostwriter? His name is David Wilcock, aided in part by another one duped into the operation, one Michael Henry Dunn, who is probably the actual ghostwriter we suspect for Wilcock. Again, Financial Tyranny is the name of the book. We have an email on file from Michael Henry Dunn sent to Charlie on the date 15 January 2013, wherein Mr. Dunn introduced himself, which Charlie took as a way to yet again to try to get him into cooperation with this whole melee. Quote, the 15th of January 2013. Dear Charlie, my name is Michael Henry Dunn, and I've been doing some work for Neil in the last few months. He recently told me what great help you were to him at a crucial time, and how deep your research has gone down the rabbit hole. My own research is more of recent vintage, and it is my writing and synthesizing skills that are mostly at work for Neil these days. My research mostly stands on the work of earlier and deeper investigators. As I live in LA, I would be glad to connect with you sometimes. Neil let me know you are dealing with tough times right now. Maybe I could take you to lunch sometime. I live in Highland Park and also spend a fair amount of time on the west side, but I could meet you pretty much anywhere this side of San Diego. Unquote. Again, on the 15th of January 2013. To make things perfectly clear, ladies and gentlemen, Charlie attests to me in unequivocal terms he has never been a help to Neil Keenan in any material way to provide him information, other than on an occasion or two telling Keenan what a fraudulent document looks like. For the most part, there was very little communication from Charlie after Keenan had found a way to try and connect with him. It was Keenan fishing for information while he was being schooled by Keith Francis Scott on how to run the game he was preparing for. I looked at a lot of dossier material while I was in California. These various emails goes years back before any of this other information that we know today had ever seen the light of day. I am going to conclude this video with an admission from Charlie given to me on November 24th, 2014, which is before Mr. Keenan decided to come out of hiding to grace his followers with his recent ridiculous displays of bravado on his blog and on Bailey's Blog Talk radio show, wherein Bailey bloviates on about nothing. In the midst of my first recorded conversation with Charlie, he asserted this.
He has wired me money to try to stay alive here 3 or 4 times.
Further, in the course of the conversation regarding Keenan's fraud, he said this.
Well, you know, I have a problem. If somebody hits an old lady over the head and steals her Social Security check, and then he runs across the street and he hands me, who's starving to death, money over a period of time to feed me, I've got a problem now with that money.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And I'm not in a position right now to make sure that it goes back to its rightful owner. But I'll tell you one thing right now, Scott, if I were, I wouldn't have that money right now. I'd return it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't figured it out by now, the man we call Charlie is none other than Paul Cullen, famous now for his website called Unwanted Publicity Intelligence, which was misused by many people for their own ends, including Keenan, and which is cited in the beginning chapter of David Wilcock's fantasy called Financial Tyranny, a book used to prop up and advertise Keenan's fraudulent operations. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Cullen was wise the entire time what they were trying to inveigle him into. And many times, he just stayed silent. Period. Every once in a while, he would send an email cordially saying hello. That's about the extent of Paul Cullen's interface with the fraud, Neil Keenan. I can guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, that if Paul Cullen knew in advance what Keenan was up to, having seen this big display over the last several years, Paul Cullen would have turned his back on it in 2 seconds flat. He did not help Neil Keenan at all. He did not do any work for Mr. Keenan of any really great length. And that's what he asserts. And that's a fact. Because I saw all the emails. All of them. And in none of those emails did Cullen actually put a lot of research in. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for the final chapter of this tangled web of deceit put forward by Keenan and Company. The investigation has a lot of details that need to be sorted out, and the production is taking a great deal of time to pull together. But we can assure you that we'll leave nothing out that is pertinent to verifying the veracity of the facts being assembled. It's going to occur over the next 2 weeks. It's going to take quite a bit of time. My name is Scott Pollack, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago. Again, Team Keenan, or Group K, or whatever they want to call themselves, can call 312-544-0134, and we'll put them on the air, and we'll have our investigators in tow. 312-544-0134. They've got my email. They know exactly how to get a hold of me. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for indulging us here at the Critical Post Chicago. That is all.